The Jefferson County Courthouse stood tall and imposing against the clear blue sky. Inside Courtroom 4B, the usual sounds of shuffling papers and quiet whispers filled the air. Judge Eleanor Martinez adjusted her black robe and glanced at her calendar. Another adoption case, something that normally brought her joy amid the often difficult family court proceedings. Nathan Reeves fidgeted in his seat, his 12-year-old frame seeming small in the large wooden chair. His foster parents, the Wilsons, sat beside him, their faces showing a mix of excitement and nervousness. Today was supposed to be a formality, the final step in making Nathan officially part of their family after 3 years in their care. Case number 2025 FC 1482, in the matter of the adoption of Nathan James Reeves, the court clerk announced. Judge Martinez looked up from her papers, her eyes scanning the room before landing on the boy. Something flickered across her face, a momentary hesitation that no one seemed to notice. She composed herself quickly, offering a warm smile to the family. "Good morning, everyone. I understand we're here for a final adoption hearing," she said, her voice clear and steady. Mr. Wilson nodded eagerly. "Yes, Your Honor. We've completed all the required paperwork and home visits." As the adult spoke, Nathan couldn't take his eyes off the judge. There was something about her that seemed strangely familiar. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the small birthmark near her temple that appeared when she pushed back a strand of her dark hair. Even the sound of her voice stirred something in his memory. Nathan had spent the last few months searching for clues about his birth mother. His social worker had finally given him a copy of his birth certificate and a single faded photograph after he had begged for information about his origins. The photo showed a young woman with her face partially turned away from the camera. All he could really see was a dark birthmark near her temple and the curve of her smile. Judge Martinez asked Nathan some standard questions about his time with the Wilsons. Whether he was happy, if he wanted to be adopted, if he understood what adoption meant. Nathan answered politely but remained distracted, his mind racing as he continued to study her face. "And Nathan, do you have any questions for me before we proceed?" Judge Martinez asked kindly. The courtroom grew quiet as everyone waited for the boy's response. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't planned this moment. He hadn't even been certain until now. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, he knew. The birthmark, the voice, the way she smiled, it all matched the fragments of memory he had carried since he was 3 years old. Nathan stood up slowly, his legs shaking slightly. Mrs. Wilson reached for his hand, thinking he might be nervous, but he stepped forward, away from her touch. "Nathan?" the judge prompted gently. Taking a deep breath, Nathan spoke the words that would change everyone's lives forever. "You are my mother." The courtroom fell completely silent. No papers shuffled. No one coughed or whispered. It was as if everyone had forgotten to breathe. Judge Martinez's face drained of color. The pen she was holding slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the wooden bench before her. Her professional mask cracked, revealing a flash of recognition, shock, and what might have been fear or hope, or both. For one eternal moment, mother and son looked at each other across the divide of the courtroom, the weight of their shared past hanging in the air between them. The silence in the courtroom was broken when Judge Martinez called for a 15-minute recess. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke, something that had never happened in her 12 years on the bench. She disappeared through the door behind her desk, leaving everyone in a state of confusion. Nathan sat back down, suddenly aware of all the eyes on him. Mrs. Wilson put her arm around his shoulders. "Nathan, honey, what made you say that?" she whispered. But Nathan couldn't explain it properly. It was a feeling, a certainty that had taken over him in that moment. Instead of answering, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded photograph he always carried. 9 years earlier, Nathan had entered the foster care system on a cold October night. He was only 3 years old when police officers found him alone in an apartment, his mother nowhere to be found. His memories of that night were fuzzy, just flashes of bright lights, strange faces, and the terrible feeling of being lost. His first foster home lasted 6 months, the second, almost a year. By the time he was 7, he had lived in 4 different homes. Some were nice, others less so, but none of them felt like they belonged to him. Then came the Wilsons. Tom and Sarah Wilson had no children of their own, And from the moment Nathan arrived at their modest two-story house with his small backpack of belongings, they treated him differently than the others had. "This is your room," Sarah had told him, showing him a space with blue walls and a real wooden bed. "Not just a room in our house, but your room." For the first time, Nathan was allowed to put up posters. He could leave his toys out sometimes without getting in trouble. When he had nightmares, which happened often in those early days, someone always came. Still, Nathan wondered about his real mother. The social workers told him very little, just that she had problems and couldn't take care of him. On his 10th birthday, his caseworker Ms. Jenkins had given him an envelope. "I probably shouldn't do this yet," she had said, "but I think you're mature enough to have it." Inside was his original birth certificate and the photograph, a young woman with dark hair turning away from the camera, but not before the flash caught the distinctive birthmark near her temple. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were the words Alina and baby Nate, Hospital, 2013. Nathan studied that photograph every night before bed for 2 years. Sometimes he thought he could remember her voice, singing softly. Other times, he remembered the smell of her perfume, but he couldn't recall her face clearly, just that birthmark. When the Wilsons told Nathan they wanted to adopt him, he was happy. They were kind and he loved them, but something held him back from complete joy. It was as if a part of him was still waiting for his mother to return. "I never understood why she left me," Nathan confessed to Mrs. Wilson one night, about a month before the adoption hearing. "Was I bad? Did she not love me enough?" "Oh, Nathan," Mrs. Wilson had said, hugging him close. "I'm sure she loved you very much. Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with their children." In the courtroom, Nathan handed the photograph to the Wilsons. They looked at it, then at him, understanding slowly dawning on their faces. "The birthmark," Mr. Wilson whispered. "Just like the judges." Nathan nodded. "And her voice, I remember her voice." The court officer appeared, announcing that proceedings would resume. Nathan put the photograph back in his pocket and stood up. Whatever happened next, he knew his life would never be the same. For 9 years, he had been a boy without a past. Now, that past was sitting on the judge's bench, wearing a black robe and looking at him with eyes that mirrored his own. Judge Eleanor Martinez sat in her chambers, hands trembling as she stared at her reflection in the small mirror on her desk. The birthmark near her temple, the one she usually covered with makeup but had missed this morning in her rush, seemed to mock her. For 15 years, she had built a new life, a respectable life. Now, in an instant, her carefully constructed world threatened to collapse. Eleanor reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small silver key. With it, she unlocked the bottom drawer, the one she rarely opened. Inside was a worn leather photo album. She flipped to the first page where a picture of a baby boy with bright eyes and a toothless smile looked back at her. She turned the pages slowly, tracking the growth of her son through his first 3 years. The last photo had been taken just days before she lost him, Nathan playing in the park, laughing as he came down a slide. She hadn't always been Judge Martinez. Once, she was just Alina Reyes, a 19-year-old college dropout with a baby and a growing addiction to painkillers. The addiction had started after a car accident in her freshman year. By the time Nathan was born, pills controlled her life. She had tried to be a good mother and loved her son fiercely, but the drugs made it impossible. The night everything changed, Alina had left Nathan sleeping to meet her dealer. She had only planned to be gone for 20 minutes, but the dealer was late, and then she met some friends, and one thing led to another. When she finally returned home nearly 6 hours later, police cars surrounded her apartment building. Her baby was gone. Child Protective Services gave her chances to get clean, to prove she could be a fit mother. For a while, she got supervised visits with Nathan, but each time she failed a drug test, the visits became less frequent. When Nathan was 4, her parental rights were terminated. It was the rock bottom she needed to finally get clean. After that, Alina disappeared. She moved to another state, changed her name to Eleanor Martinez, finished college, and then law school. She never married, never had other children. Instead, she focused on her career, eventually becoming a family court judge where she hoped to help children like her son. She had searched for Nathan over the years, hiring private investigators who discovered he had been placed for adoption. But the records were sealed, and she respected that. She told herself that he was better off without her, that he had a new family who loved him. She had no right to disrupt his life. Yet here he was, in her courtroom, looking at her with eyes that were so familiar, eyes that had once looked up at her with complete trust and love. A knock on the door broke her reverie. "Your Honor, it's been 15 minutes, her clerk said through the door. "Thank you, David. I'll be right out," Eleanor replied, quickly wiping away tears. She closed the photo album and returned it to the drawer, locking it away once more, but she couldn't lock away the truth anymore. Nathan had found her, against all odds. What would happen now? Would the Wilsons still want to adopt him? Would Nathan hate her when he learned the full story? Would her career be over once it became known that she had presided over her biological son's adoption case, even unknowingly? Eleanor straightened her robe and took a deep breath. She had faced many difficult situations in her life, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Whatever came next, she knew she had to be honest, with the court, with the Wilsons, and most importantly, with Nathan. As she opened the door to return to the courtroom, Eleanor made a silent promise to the boy she had lost all those years ago. This time, she would not run away. This time, she would face the consequences of her actions, no matter how painful. She owed Nathan that much and more. "Court will resume session," the bailiff announced as Judge Martinez returned to the courtroom. Everyone rose as she entered, but her usual confident stride was missing. She moved carefully, as if the floor might break beneath her feet. When she sat down, her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her papers. "Before we continue," Judge Martinez began, her voice more formal than before, "I need to address the statement made by Nathan Reeves." The courtroom remained unnaturally quiet. Even the usual shuffling of papers had stopped. All eyes moved between the boy and the judge, searching for similarities they hadn't noticed before. "Nathan," Judge Martinez said, looking directly at him, "you made a very serious claim. What made you think I might be your mother?" Nathan stood again, more confident this time. Mrs. Wilson tried to pull him back down, but he gently removed her hand from his arm. "The birthmark," he said, pointing to the small dark mark near the judge's temple. "My birth mother had the same one. I have a picture." He pulled a worn photograph from his pocket and held it up. "And your voice. I remember your voice from when I was little." Judge Martinez gripped the edge of her desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had covered that birthmark with makeup for years, a habit so ingrained she did it without thinking. But this morning, running late after a difficult night of insomnia, she had forgotten. "Your Honor," Mr. Wilson's lawyer spoke up, "perhaps we should postpone these proceedings until—" "No," Judge Martinez interrupted. "We need to address this now." She looked around the courtroom, noting the court reporter, the clerk, the bailiff, all watching with undisguised curiosity. "Bailiff, please clear the courtroom except for the Wilsons, Nathan, their attorney, and Ms. Jenkins from Child Services." After everyone else filed out, Judge Martinez removed her black robe, as if shedding the symbol of her authority. Without it, in her simple blue blouse, she looked smaller, more vulnerable. "When I was 19, she began, my name was Elena Reyes. I had a son named Nathan Miguel Reyes." A small gasp escaped Mrs. Wilson's lips. "I lost custody of my son when he was 3 years old due to my addiction to painkillers," Judge Martinez continued, her voice steady despite the tears now forming in her eyes. "After I got clean, I changed my name and started a new life. I never thought—" Her voice broke. Nathan stared at her, his eyes wide with a mix of emotions: recognition, confusion, hope, and fear, all battling for dominance. "May I see the photograph?" Judge Martinez asked. Nathan walked forward and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, the first physical contact between mother and son in 9 years. Judge Martinez looked at the photo and covered her mouth with her hand. "I remember this day," she whispered. "The nurse at the hospital took this picture. You were 2 days old." Miss Jenkins, who had been silent until now, opened the file she carried. "Your Honor, if what you're saying is true, then you have a clear conflict of interest in this case." "Yes," Judge Martinez nodded. "I will recuse myself immediately." She looked up at Nathan, who still stood before her. "Nathan, I don't know if you are my son, but if you are—" She stopped, overwhelmed by the possibility. Nathan took a step closer. "Did you ever look for me?" The question came out small but clear. Yes, she answered truthfully, but the records were sealed. I told myself you were better off without me disrupting your new life. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, searching for themselves in the other's face. The same shaped eyes, the same slight dimple in the right cheek, the same way of tilting their head when asking a question. We need a DNA test, Ms. Jenkins said, breaking the silence. To be certain. Nathan nodded, still looking at Judge Martinez. I want to know for sure, he said. Judge Martinez handed the photograph back to Nathan, careful not to touch him again. So do I, she whispered. So do I. The courthouse hallway buzzed with whispers as Judge Martinez walked briskly toward her office, her face a mask of professional calm despite the storm inside her. She had just done something unprecedented in her career. She had recused herself from Nathan's case and asked another judge to take over immediately. Behind her closed office door, Eleanor finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone and called the court administrator. Kathy, I need to speak with you urgently about a conflict of interest situation, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Meanwhile, in a small conference room down the hall, Nathan sat with the Wilsons and their lawyer. A court-appointed guardian ad litem had joined them, along with Nathan's social worker, Ms. Jenkins. The adult spoke in hushed, serious tones while Nathan stared at his hands. I didn't mean to cause trouble, he said suddenly, interrupting their conversation. I just knew it was her. Mrs. Wilson put her arm around him. You didn't do anything wrong, Nathan. Mr. Wilson leaned forward. Son, we need to know what you want now. This changes things, but it doesn't change how we feel about you. Nathan looked up, his eyes filled with confusion. I don't know what I want. I thought about finding my real mom for so long, but I never thought she would be her. Miss Jenkins opened her file. I need to investigate how this happened. The records show Nathan's birth mother as Elena Reyes. Judge Martinez's background check for her judicial appointment would have shown a different name. She changed her name, Nathan said confidently. In the picture I have, it says Elena and baby Nate on the back. The guardian ad litem, a serious woman named Mrs. Paddle, made notes. We'll need to confirm this with DNA testing, and regardless of the results, there are serious ethical questions about Judge Martinez presiding over this case, even if she didn't know. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. Someone from the courtroom had tipped them off about the dramatic scene. The story was too good to ignore. A judge confronted by her possible long-lost son during an adoption hearing. Back in her office, Eleanor made more calls. To her supervisor, to her lawyer, to a DNA testing facility. With each call, she felt her carefully built life starting to crumble. Her mind raced with questions. Would she lose her job? Would the Wilsons still want to adopt Nathan? Did Nathan hate her for abandoning him? By late afternoon, arrangements had been made. Eleanor would take a temporary leave of absence while the situation was investigated. DNA samples would be collected from both Eleanor and Nathan the next morning. The adoption hearing was postponed for 30 days. As Eleanor packed up her things, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Wilson standing there. May I come in? She asked quietly. Eleanor nodded, surprised. Nathan asked me to give you this, Mrs. Wilson said, holding out the faded photograph. Eleanor took it with trembling hands. He kept this all these years. His social worker gave it to him on his 10th birthday. He's looked at it every night since then. Eleanor stared at the younger version of herself, holding baby Nathan in the hospital. I was 19, she whispered. I was scared and stupid and addicted to pills, but I loved him so much. Mrs. Wilson surprised her by touching her arm gently. Nathan wants to talk to you. Not today. Everyone's too emotional today. But soon, my husband and I, we're trying to understand this situation. Nathan is our son in our hearts, but we know he has questions that only you can answer. Eleanor looked up, tears flowing freely now. Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't about what any of us deserve, Mrs. Wilson replied. It's about what's best for Nathan. As Mrs. Wilson left, Eleanor stared at the photograph, tracing Nathan's baby face with her finger. After 12 years of running from her past, it finally caught up with her. Whatever happened next would change everything, for her, for Nathan, and for the family that had loved him when she couldn't. 3 days after the courtroom incident, Nathan sat at the Wilsons' kitchen table, pushing cereal around in his bowl. He hadn't been back to school yet. His parents, because that's how he still thought of the Wilsons, had told the school he had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie. The doorbell rang, making Nathan jump. Mrs. Wilson squeezed his shoulder as she passed. "It's just the courier with the DNA results," she said softly. The white envelope sat unopened on the table for 10 minutes after Mrs. Wilson signed for it. Mr. Wilson had come in from the garage where he had been fixing a bicycle, keeping his hands busy while his mind worried. "Should we open it?" Mrs. Wilson finally asked. Nathan nodded, though his stomach felt tight. Part of him already knew what the letter would say. He had recognized Judge Martinez, or Elena Reyes as she had once been called, the moment he saw her in that courtroom, but another part of him feared what would happen after everyone knew the truth. Mr. Wilson carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. His eyes scanned the document, then met his wife's gaze over Nathan's head. "It's confirmed," he said simply. Judge Martinez is Nathan's biological mother. Even though Nathan had expected this answer, hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. His fork clattered onto his plate. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small. "That depends on what you want, buddy," Mr. Wilson said, sitting down beside him. "Nothing has to change if you don't want it to." But things had already changed. Nathan could feel it. Across town, Eleanor received the same results in her small apartment. She had taken a leave of absence from the court while the Judicial Ethics Committee reviewed her case. The DNA results would now become part of that investigation. Her lawyer, Patricia Goldman, sat across from her, reviewing the paperwork. "This confirms what we already knew," Patricia said. "Now we need to focus on your position with the court." "I didn't know he would be in my courtroom," Eleanor said, her voice hollow. "I gave up trying to find him years ago. I thought it was better that way." "The committee will want to know why you didn't immediately recuse yourself when you saw his name on the docket," Patricia noted. "His file listed him as Nathan James Reeves. I knew him as Nathan Miguel Reyes. And it's been 12 years. I never imagined he would be in Jefferson County, let alone my courtroom." Patricia made notes on her legal pad. "We'll emphasize that point. But Eleanor, you should prepare yourself. This could end your judicial career." Eleanor nodded, surprisingly calm. "I know. And if that's the price I have to pay for a chance to know my son, I'll pay it." The phone rang, interrupting them. Eleanor answered it, her professional voice automatically taking over. "This is Eleanor Martinez." "Judge Martinez, this is Sarah Wilson, Nathan's adopted mother." Eleanor's hand tightened around the phone. "Mrs. Wilson, I just received the DNA results." "So did we. Nathan would like to meet with you, to talk, if you're willing." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill. "Yes, of course." "When? Tomorrow afternoon? We could come to your home, or meet somewhere neutral if you prefer." "Neutral might be better for everyone," Eleanor suggested, thinking of how uncomfortable it might be for the Wilsons to sit in her living room, surrounded by the photographs of her law school graduation and judicial appointment, the life she had built while their son was growing up without her. "There's a small park near Westview Library," Mrs. Wilson suggested. "Nathan likes it there." After they agreed on a time, Eleanor hung up and turned to her lawyer, who had heard everything. "Are you sure this is wise before the ethics hearing?" Patricia asked. "I've already lost 12 years with my son," Eleanor replied. "I won't lose another day, regardless of what happens to my career." The park bench felt hard and uncomfortable beneath Nathan as he waited. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson sat on either side of him, a protective barrier against whatever might happen next. Though the spring day was pleasant, Nathan couldn't stop his leg from bouncing nervously. "There she is," Mrs. Wilson said softly, nodding toward the park entrance. Eleanor Martinez looked different without her black robe and the formal setting of the courtroom. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger. She walked slowly, as if unsure whether to approach. "Should I go to her?" Nathan whispered to Mrs. Wilson. "That's your choice, honey. We'll be right here." Nathan stood up and walked halfway to meet Eleanor. Up close, he could see she had been crying. The birthmark near her temple stood out clearly. She hadn't tried to cover it with makeup today. "Hello, Nathan," she said, her voice wavering slightly. Hi, he replied, suddenly shy despite all the questions that had filled his mind for days. They moved to a nearby picnic table, sitting across from each other. The Wilsons remained on their bench, watching from a distance that gave privacy but kept them in sight. I don't know where to start, Eleanor admitted. There's so much to say, and I'm sorry doesn't seem enough. Nathan looked directly at her. Why did you leave me? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 12 years of absence. Eleanor took a deep breath. I was very young when I had you. Just 19. After a car accident in college, I got addicted to painkillers. I tried to be a good mother, but the drugs, they took over my life. She paused, wiping a tear. The night they took you away, I left you alone to buy drugs. It was the worst mistake of my life. Did you try to get me back? Nathan's voice was small but steady. Yes, for almost a year, but I kept failing drug tests. I couldn't stay clean. When they terminated my rights, it was like something broke inside me. That's when I finally got help, got sober. And then you became a judge? Eleanor nodded. It took many years. I changed my name, moved here, went back to college and then law school. I thought helping other families might somehow make up for failing you. It doesn't, of course. Nothing could. They talked for almost an hour. Nathan asked questions about his early years, about his birth father, a college boyfriend who had never been involved, about family medical history. Eleanor answered everything honestly, even when the truth was painful. Did you ever try to find me? Nathan asked. Yes, when you were about 8, I hired a private investigator. He discovered you had been placed with a good family for adoption, but the records were sealed. I told myself you were better off without me disrupting your new life. As they talked, the Wilsons had a difficult conversation of their own. What if she wants him back? Mrs. Wilson whispered, her eyes never leaving Nathan. Mr. Wilson took her hand. She terminated her rights years ago. Legally, she can't just take him. But what if Nathan wants to go with her? He's been searching for her his whole life. Then we support him, Mr. Wilson said, though his voice cracked, because we love him. As the afternoon grew later, everyone gathered at the picnic table. The tension was palpable as these two separate parts of Nathan's life faced each other. I want to be clear about something, Eleanor said, addressing the Wilsons directly. I'm not here to disrupt your family. You've given Nathan everything I couldn't. You're his parents in all the ways that matter. Mrs. Wilson's eyes filled with tears of relief. But, Eleanor continued, looking at Nathan, if you want me in your life in some way, I would be honored. Whatever role you think is right, whether that's just answering questions occasionally or something more regular. Nathan looked between these adults who all, in different ways, loved him. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. Not because he had found his birth mother, but because he finally understood his story, where he came from and why things had happened the way they did. I think, he said slowly, I'd like to know you, not instead of my parents, but in addition to them. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in Courtroom 4B. The maple trees in the Wilsons' front yard had turned brilliant shades of orange and red. Nathan sat on the porch steps, watching Mr. Wilson rake leaves into piles. Need any help, Dad? He called out. Mr. Wilson grinned. Thought you'd never ask. As Nathan grabbed a second rake from the garage, he glanced at his watch. It was nearly 4 o'clock. Eleanor would be arriving soon for their weekly Sunday dinner. Inside the house, Mrs. Wilson and Eleanor worked side by side in the kitchen. What had begun as awkward politeness had slowly transformed into something resembling friendship. They were connected by their love for the same boy, a powerful bond that had overcome initial jealousy and fear. Nathan got an A on his history project, Mrs. Wilson mentioned as she chopped vegetables for a salad. Eleanor smiled proudly. He showed me his research last weekend. He's so smart. The path to this new normal hadn't been easy. The Judicial Ethics Committee had conducted a thorough investigation of Eleanor's actions. In the end, they determined that she could not have reasonably known that Nathan was her biological son when his case appeared on her docket. Still, because of the public nature of the incident, they recommended she transfer to a different division of the court. Eleanor now worked in the criminal division, where she had no contact with family court cases. It was an adjustment, but she found satisfaction in her new role. More importantly, it allowed her to remain in the same city as Nathan. The adoption had proceeded with a different judge presiding. The Wilsons were officially and legally Nathan's parents, but they had done something extraordinary. They had written into the adoption agreement that Eleanor would have regular visitation rights, something almost unheard of in closed adoptions. "Dinner's almost ready," Mrs. Wilson called out the window. "You two come wash up." As Nathan and Mr. Wilson came in through the back door, laughing and covered in leaf fragments, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Nathan said, running to the front door. He opened it to find Ms. Jenkins, his former social worker, standing there with a small gift bag. "I hope I'm not too late," she said, smiling. "Just in time," Nathan replied, giving her a quick hug. Ms. Jenkins had become an unexpected part of their extended family. She had been so moved by how everyone had put Nathan's needs first that she had stayed in touch long after her professional duties were complete. Around the dinner table, this unusual family shared their week's events. Nathan told jokes that made everyone laugh. Mr. Wilson described a challenging project at his construction job. Mrs. Wilson shared news about the elementary school where she taught. Eleanor talked about an interesting case, careful to keep the details confidential. After dinner, while the adults cleaned up, Nathan went to his room and returned with a leather-bound book. "I finished it," he announced proudly. It was a project he had been working on for months, a scrapbook that told his life story. The first pages contained the few photos he had of his early years with Elena, including the hospital picture. The middle section showed his time in foster care, with notes from some of his foster parents whom Ms. Jenkins had helped him contact. The largest section was filled with photos of his life with the Wilsons. And now, the final pages showed new memories. Nathan and Eleanor at a baseball game. Nathan with both Mrs. Wilson and Eleanor at his school play. The whole unusual family at Thanksgiving dinner. "It's beautiful, Nathan," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always wanted to know where I came from," Nathan explained. "Now I do, and I know where I belong too." As they gathered in the living room later, Nathan sat between Mr. and Mrs. Wilson on the couch, with Eleanor in the armchair nearby. To an outside observer, they might have looked like any extended family spending Sunday evening together. And in all the ways that mattered, that's exactly what they were. Nathan's story had no perfect ending, real life rarely does. But it had the right ending for him, a boy who was finally whole, surrounded by adults who had set aside their own fears and needs to give him what he truly required: the complete truth of his past and the security of unconditional love in his present.